Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, we continue our little retrospective of the great films of Satyajit Ray of India. Today, we're screening the 1964 classic CHARULATA. Set in 1879, it's very much part of Victorian India, a country struggling for its colonial identity. And our key character is a woman trapped in an upper-class home. This is a great film reminiscent in many ways, say, of Madame Bovary or even the plays of Anton Chekhov. It was Ray's favorite film. To discuss this film afterward, we have with us an expert on South Asian film, Professor Anupama Kapse of Queen's College. Now take this extraordinary journey into the 19th century in Calcutta in CHARULATA. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to visit 1879 Calcutta and the world of one of Satyajit Ray's greatest films, CHARULATA. There's a lot to talk about here, and we've got 30 minutes to do so. It's a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque one of my colleagues from the CUNY system, Professor Anupama Kapse. She's an associate professor of film studies and media studies at Queen's College. She's the co-editor of the award-winning book anthology, Silent Cinema and the Politics of Space. Her general interests include stardom, gender, melodrama, South Asian cinema. Indeed, her current scholarly project is a monograph on early Indian cinema, film form, and citizenship. Welcome back, Anu. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So, this film is, in a certain sense, a film made by two masters. The first master is the one we've already mentioned, Satyajit Ray, the great, great director. But this is based upon a novella. Tell us about that second master, who he was, and what this relationship is between the novella and the film.
It's a great question. The novella was published in 1901 by the Nobel Prize winning Rabindranath Tagore. It was based on Tagore's relationship with his own sister-in-law, Kadambari Devi, and that's why the relationship between the brother-in-law and the sister-in-law is so charged and so potent in this film. And both Tagore and Ray, who made the film much later in 1964, the novella was published in 1901 in serialized form, but it was set by Ray in the 1870s.
Okay.
So there's another interlocutor here, and that's Bankim Chandra, who is, as you see Charu singing at the beginning of the film. So that's a reference to another novelist, Bankim, who was Tagore's mentor in a sense, but also a very popular writer at that time, very, very romantic sensibility, and that sensibility imbues the film. And one of the biggest challenges for Ray was to take words and then turn them into images and music.
Right, absolutely. Now, both of these men, just to go back to a little bit of biographical summary, they really are, when you say masters, they're also Renaissance men, as we would say this, because Rabindranath Tagore was an educational reformer. He was a philosopher. He was a composer of songs. He was a poet. He was an author of prose fiction, etc. And in the case of Ray, not only is he a filmmaker, he writes stories, he writes books, he composes music. As well for his films, as well as working with a number of very distinguished Indian musicians, as well as being deeply involved in the graphic design of the films. So we're talking about two men who are of multiple of multiple talents. So talk to us a little bit about this particular setting of setting it back in 1879. What does that do to the story?
I think it interweaves a lot of historical references. So there's a reference to the press. This is also the height. You know, it hasn't quite reached its peak yet, but these are the first stirrings of the nationalist movement in India. So they both become very important backdrops for the film, the romance, and also the romance and the flirtation, that is, and the stirrings of nationalist consciousness. So Bhupati's press is called the Sentinel, and he's very much involved in staging a kind of freedom struggle, but modeling himself on an English gentleman. And both Amal and Bhupati model themselves like brown sahibs, what Macaulay would call a brown sahib, that is an Indian gentleman.
Okay.
And for the men, the conflict is to overcome some of these ideological hurdles.
Okay.
And Amal is still a sort of a man-child. He's not quite there yet. He's dreaming of the Mediterranean. He's dreaming of the continent. Whereas Bhupati is older, considerably older than Charu. She's his child bride.
Right.
And he's heavily invested in the press. But of course, that becomes a source of enormous conflict in the film, within Bhupati's life as well.
Right. And you bring up a very interesting point about, you know, his obsession with the press. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the tenets of post-colonial theory, mm-hmm. That actually the print culture is key to nation building in the 19th century, and then key to a variety of the anti-colonial struggles as well. So the husband sees this as one of the ideals that the British have brought, but like so many things in the contradictions of the colonial world, this is going to have a contradictory effect, because exactly this kind of liberty is what will lead towards eventually, some 60 years later, Indian independence.
Right, and the reflections that Amal often has about, who he should be, whether he should be a Bengali, whether he should be an Indian, whether he should be a Sahib, are a very important part of his coming of age through the course of the novel. And ironically, although Amal wants to be a writer, Bhupati wants to run this press, it is Charu who turns out to be the best writer. She gets the best review in the film. Right,
absolutely the case. So we can come back to these guys, as it were, but this is a film called CHARULATA, and it really is remarkable in being so much centered, which is not to say we don't have scenes without her, because we do see Amal and Bhupati, on their own. But if there's a focalizer for the story, or a dominant focalizer, it is CHARULATA. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about how the film portrays her social situation, located both historically, and then I think Ray has just an enormous repertoire in the film of ways to express what's going on with her.
Yes, Ray called this his favorite film. He said he didn't budget the time. It's a period piece. It's very much like a chamber drama. Although Ray's influences tend to be French, this is almost like a German Kammerspiel drama. Much of the film unfolds in a bedroom or in the cavernous interior, Gothic interiors of this Victorian household. And Charu is kind of trapped in that. And that's why the binoculars, if I had to pick one prop from the film, it would be the binoculars. The binoculars are her window to the world, from which, she has been foreclosed. And the writing also is a very imaginative activity for her, although she keeps disavowing its possibilities. It's very interesting that the reviews of her work are fantastic. Amal applauds her for her writing, but she sort of views it as an enemy of her relationship with Amal, and she desires him intensely. It's not even an affair, but the Bengali readers, when they first read Tagore's novella, were actually not happy that the setting was a household, but there were no children in it.
Okay.
And that's a very significant omission, because that is a sign of the distance between Bhupati and Charu, and that's why Amal becomes the center of Charu's intense desire. And the binoculars are a window to the outside world, and it's also the means, they're also the means through which Charu turns her gaze upon the object of her desire. And it's a very interesting reversal of Laura Mulvey's classic formulation of the male gaze. And it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, I think you bring up this excellent point here that, first of all, we get to see what she's looking at. And we get a profound sense of her, not merely social entrapment, but an emotional and psychological entrapment as well. And again, following from what you said a little bit earlier, this also has to do with this negotiation between a traditional, because she may be a highly desirable bride given her social position, but she does come from a village and has come to the city to be this bride, and yet here she is using this manifestly Western prop, the opera glasses, which are something we also associate with. How shall I put it? The intrigue of the opera house within the European 19th century setting as well. And it allows her both to get outside, to examine things more carefully, but at the same time, we know of the distance that's maintained by its use.
Right. The opera glasses, of course, they're wonderful because they do so many things in the film. So for her, they become the window to the theater of the world itself. And you see the Monkey Man, you hear all sorts of music, and Ray worked very hard on retrieving some of these sounds from the 1870s. The Monkey Man is, of course, a favorite motif for Ray, and also it's the sound of the Monkey Man that guides her movement. It's a circular movement. It's kind of like a panopticon,
right,
but not quite, because she's a woman. And this is the difference. The men are caught up in these ideological conflicts, whereas for Charu, the thing that matters most is creative expression and freedom. And that's why the theater that's unfolding outside the windows, and she has to go to many different windows, and she's not satisfied, they in fact become very enticing in terms of the possibilities they offer. And I also want to add that in the novella, in Tagore's novella, the garden that Charu and Amal fall in love in, they're building this Japanese garden, which is very exotic.
Right.
So the garden is exotic, like all the things that Charu can see and spy on from the entrapment of her home, but does not have access to. So the garden becomes a counterpoint to the bedroom. It's a world of possibility. But even there's a very rude reminder when she's using the binoculars/opera glasses. She's looking at Amal. This is the first time she falls in love with him, but then she also sees this woman with a child, and that's a very rude reminder of all the things that she's supposed to do that she doesn't have. And it's also a big conflict between her desire for Amal and her calling, which is to be a wife and a mother. It's beautifully done, and Ray's camera work, of course, is fantastic. Bansi Chandragupta's set design is, again, really, really fantastic. All the elements work together so beautifully to produce this choreography of desire. And Charu ultimately has to struggle with her desire and assuming the role that has been defined for her.
Right, right. No, one of the ways we know about this, and let's go back to some of the cinematic features of the film is this is a film that has almost 10 minutes at the beginning of it, in which we're simply allied with Charu's life. We are following her as we're figuring out who is she, what is she doing, and we get this enormous sense of her class, of her boredom, of her entrapment, all of which is given without reference to the spoken or written word in a film in which everybody's dedicated to the written word.
Yes, the musical motifs in the film do a lot of work here. And the first time that we see Charu, we see her pulling out a novel by Bankim, of course, and she is in fact singing Bankim, Bankim, and that becomes a musical motif. And later this is repeated when they're in the garden and she's looking at Amal and she's saying, thank you, thank you. It's the same tone. So these are musical motifs, I think, that tie up and create the subjective space for Charu. It's a very, very finely drawn drama of expressions, of internal feelings, the inner eye, to use a phrase that Andrew Robinson uses. So this is what Charu is thinking and feeling. She's a very intuitive actress. And Ray and Madhavi Mukherjee, who plays Charu in the film, are completely they're so harmonious in what they're doing. And the way the camera sometimes just stays on her face for very long periods of time, so that would be a long take, but it also does these, quick sort of zooms and zoom outs of, pulling into the scene and pulling out, which Ray described as a kind of signature of the pen, just suddenly kind of closing a sentence with a pen and flinging it down on the table. So that effect is really important because this is how Ray, I think, translates words into images. There's so much calligraphy in the film.
Absolutely. A very good point.
Embroidery.
Right.
And there too, initially you see Charu embroidering Bhupati's name, so there's a B, and the embroidery soon turns into Amal. Right. So that's a transition that Ray is able to trace brilliantly just through suggestion in the film. And in many ways, it's not a faithful adaptation. If people want to think about adaptation, I think Ray manages to be very compressed, very different from Tagore, and yet he's so close to Tagore in spirit.
Right. You bring up this point that also that we're at this moment not only of a nascent nationalism, okay, but in this conflict between the countryside and the city. The city is burgeoning because of any number of changes within the society, but also we have this tension. It's not always a confrontation between something like the printing press, which is defined as an English language medium, and then all of the things that are being written in Bengali that are defined, and the camera lovingly watching the scripting itself. The camera no less being interested in the machinery of modernity and all of these political ideas that are coming with it. But interestingly, the husband cannot conceive that the printing press would be used for non-political means. That it would be, at least initially, that no. I mean, this is for political ideas, not that other stuff.
And later on, when he is with his friends, he discovers from his friends that his wife has been publishing. And her story has gotten this rave reviews and has gotten wonderful reception. And suddenly he becomes a star. This ordinary, boring, middle-aged man becomes a star in the eyes of his friends.
Right.
And it's again, talking about the calligraphy and the use of words. When Bhupati tries to woo Charu back, because suddenly he feels after his press presses, it starts to go down because, it's lost money. And he decides that one way of turning his life around is to pay attention to his wife, whom he has neglected. By that time, of course, it's a little too late, but he woos Charu with Tennyson and Browning. So again, very interesting that the markers of romance come from the West.
Right.
But this is also a very Indian film, and there's an interesting tension in how it inscribes romance between the English language references and the Bengali references.
Well, let's talk about language. Let's continue on that line for just a minute, because this is a film in which there really are three languages spoken. Bengali is being spoken. English is spoken at certain times, but then we are, what do we want to call it? There's a if this was Spanish and English, we would call it Spanglish.
Yes.
But this is the Bengali equivalent of Spanglish, because particularly when Bhupati is with his male peers of his same class, there's this code switching that's constantly going on between English and Bengali. English being appropriate to express certain ideas, Bengali being more appropriate for others, but with a lot of fluidity, not just one side or the other.
Right. I think all the characters in the film, especially the men, are bilingual. They are hybrid creatures. And I think that hybridity is very significant because it's a site of negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
This is where cultural identity is negotiated. This is where nationalism must clarify itself, because it's often, although in Bhupati's eyes, not a conflict between Western and Indian values. It's something that he has to work out in terms of his agenda.
Right.
How Indian should I be? How English should I be? Should British parliamentarians be my models or not? So that code switching, I think, also dramatizes for the men a sort of space of intimacy. So Bengali is a space of intimacy, and English is formal.
Right. No, and we see that with the gathering, in the larger salon
Mm-hmm.
of the home, with all the men there. And with the musicians,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a perfectly hybrid site in that way, because they're bringing in the musicians, they're eating traditional, they're having traditional refreshments. Yet at the same time, they're debating
Mm-hmm.
how advanced and modern they are, and what these particular paths should be. So let's go back a little bit to Charu and what we might call her trajectory,
Mm-hmm.
in the film. So what do you make of what Charu does or does not learn, and how she's both empowered but also constrained by where she is?
I think the place where she has most power is with the small flirtations.
Okay, yeah.
So the betel leaves are my favorite part of the film. At one point, Bhupati invites Manda, her sister-in-law,
Right.
to kind of keep her company because he's afraid that she's getting bored. And very soon, Amal also arrives on the scene, and both the women compete with each other about who should administer the perfect betel leaves to Amal. And betel leaves, as you know, are mild narcotics.
Right.
So
Who's the dealer, right?
So I think that is, again, it's also a design element, because the shape of the betel leaf is a little bit like the spade that you see in cards. Manda and Charu are playing cards on very boring afternoons.
Absolutely.
And then when Amal comes, it becomes a contest about who should give him the betel leaves. Charu also embroiders for him. She also makes these shoes for him, which are also embroidered shoes. In other words, this is how women interact with them. This is with men.
Right.
This is their way of expressing themselves. And I might even add that this is as close as we are going to get to physical intimacy in the film, because that's not possible. What is possible is food. Embroidery is possible, shoes are possible, songs are possible. So the very fact that physical intimacy is not possible, this is also a brother-in-law. Charu is supposed to mother him a little bit. So it's kind of a cusp between mothering and also very intense, almost sexual affection. But this is the playing field.
Right. Right. And that's one of the things that Ray, I think, is so gifted at in this film, is giving us both our alliance with the characters. I mean, we feel intimately inside their lives, but he doesn't want us to mistake them for us. He wants to give us, these are the terms that they had at this particular moment to make their decisions by, and I think that's a remarkable accomplishment that he brings all of his craft to. I mean, again, as you've pointed out, I mean, just the detailing of the spaces within the house and how different rooms bespeak different privileges or lack of privilege. What is a space which is going to be a dominantly male space? What is a space that's going to be more Western or European? What's a space that's going to be more traditionally Indian? All of that is set up there.
Right, and the box in which the betel leaves are kept is also, it's shaped like a betel leaf. So the betel leaf, I would say, is as important a prop as the opera glasses.
Right.
But this is the limit of what Charu can do. Right. This is the boundary that she cannot cross.
Right. And of course, we actually have to wrap up now. And so what we have is, just to summarize a little bit what you've said, we've got these two major sets of props, one of which points backward towards all the tradition of India, for the betel leaf box, etc., and the other which bespeaks all of the, how shall I put it, the new connections brought by contact with the West and by British colonialism. And he, masterfully orchestrates all of these motifs together.
Right, and ultimately, of course, it also turns into a conflict between a role which is traditional and has already been defined, and Charu's inherent modernity. It's funny that the men have the power to make the ideological decisions, but it is Charu who is the most modern in her outlook.
That's where we have to. That's where we have to end. If you've enjoyed this discussion of CHARULATA, please come and join us for other discussions. Those discussions will be on other films in other weeks. You can find information about that by visiting the City University television website, www.cuny.tv. There you're going to find information about upcoming works here on City Cinematheque, as well as the full range of programs at City University Television. So please visit www.cuny.tv. Anu, I want to thank you for a very rich 30 minutes worth of discussion. There's a lot more to be said about this film, and I hope that our viewers take the conversation here as a modest inspiration for their own exploration. But thank you for what you've brought to us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me a chance to discuss Ray's favorite film and my favorite film as well.
Okay, super. And thank you for joining us here on City Cinematheque. And we look forward to your coming back as we stroll through the archives of film history. But for now, it's goodbye.